The gentle hum of the kettle filled the small, cozy apartment as Emma prepared her evening tea. It was a ritual she'd grown to cherish over the years, a moment of calm in the chaos of London life. The warm glow of the kitchen lights cast long shadows across the worn wooden floors, creating an atmosphere of comfort that Emma had come to associate with home. As she poured the steaming water over the tea bag, watching the amber liquid swirl and darken, Emma's phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't think much of it at first, probably just another work email or a message from her sister about their upcoming weekend plans. But as she picked up the device, her heart skipped a beat when she saw Daniel's name on the screen. Daniel, her partner of 5 years, the man she'd built a life with in this very apartment. He was supposed to be on a business trip, something about a conference in Manchester. They hadn't spoken much in the past few days, but Emma had chalked it up to his busy schedule. Now, as she opened the message, a chill ran down her spine, a premonition of the storm that was about to break. The words on the screen seemed to blur and shift, refusing to make sense at first. Emma blinked, took a deep breath, and read the message again. "I'm traveling with my new fiancée, she's only 21, and I'm taking all our savings with me. Good luck surviving on the street, haha." Time seemed to stop. The mug of tea in her hand grew cold, forgotten. The sounds of the city outside their third-floor window faded away, leaving Emma in a bubble of silence, broken only by the pounding of her heart in her ears. She read the message again. And again. Each time, the words cut deeper, their cruel intent becoming clearer. Daniel, her Daniel, had not only cheated on her but was now gleefully informing her that he had stolen their shared savings and left her with nothing. Emma's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle of the past few months. The late nights at work, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in his appearance, it all made a sickening kind of sense now. How long had this been going on? How had she been so blind? She thought about the life they'd built together. The dreams they'd shared. The future they'd planned. All of it, apparently, meant nothing to Daniel. He'd thrown it all away for a woman barely out of her teens, and he had the audacity to laugh about leaving Emma destitute. As the reality of the situation sank in, Emma waited for the tears to come. She waited for the anger, the heartbreak, the despair. But instead, a strange calm settled over her. It was as if a switch had been flipped in her mind, shutting down her emotional responses and leaving only a cool, calculated logic in its place. With steady hands, she set her phone down on the kitchen counter. She walked to the living room, her eyes scanning the space that suddenly felt alien to her. Photos of her and Daniel smiled back at her from the walls, lies frozen in time. She approached one, a picture of them on holiday in Greece last summer. They looked so happy, so in love. Emma reached out and turned the frame face down. Returning to the kitchen, Emma picked up her phone again. She reread Daniel's message, letting each word sink in. Then, with a calmness that surprised even her, she began to type her response. "Good luck, haha, you'll regret this." Her thumb hovered over the send button for a moment. Was this really happening? Was this really how 5 years of love and trust were ending? With a text message and a cold reply? But as Emma thought about Daniel's callous words, about the betrayal and theft, her resolve hardened. She hit send. The message disappeared into the ether, and Emma placed her phone back down on the counter. She took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, and then slowly released it. The game, as she thought to herself, had indeed begun. Emma's mind, now eerily clear and focused, began to race through their shared history. Every conversation, every decision, every document they'd signed together, it all came under new scrutiny. She walked to their shared office, a small room off the living area that they'd converted when they both started working from home more often. Opening the filing cabinet, Emma began to rifle through their financial documents. Bank statements, investment reports, rental agreements, she pulled them all out, spreading them across the desk. As she scanned the papers, a plan began to form in her mind. Daniel might think he had one, that he had left her with nothing. But Emma knew better. She had always been the one to handle their finances, the one who made sure the bills were paid on time and their savings were growing. Daniel, for all his bravado, had never paid much attention to the details. As she sorted through the documents, Emma's phone remained silent. No frantic calls from Daniel, no attempts to backtrack or explain. The silence was both unsettling and empowering. It meant she had time to think, time to plan, time to act. Emma's eyes fell on a document she had almost forgotten about. It was the paperwork for their joint savings account, the one Daniel claimed to have emptied. But as she read through the fine print, a small smile began to form on her lips. There was a clause, one she had insisted on when they opened the account, that required both of their signatures for any large withdrawals. She quickly logged into their online banking, her heart racing as the page loaded. And there it was, their savings, still intact. Daniel hadn't been able to touch it. His text had been a bluff, a cruel attempt to hurt her. But in his arrogance, he had shown his hand too soon. Emma leaned back in her chair, her mind whirling with possibilities. She had resources, she had time, and most importantly, she had the element of surprise. Daniel thought he had left her broken and penniless. He had no idea what was coming. As the night deepened outside, Emma remained at the desk, formulating her plan. She made calls to their bank, to their lawyer, to trusted friends who could offer advice and support. With each conversation, with each decision made, she felt stronger, more in control. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Emma had set her plan in motion. She had transferred their savings to a new account in her name only, using the power of attorney Daniel had granted her months ago for ease of managing their finances. She had contacted their landlord and arranged to have the lease transferred solely to her name. She had even begun the process of freezing their joint credit cards. As she finally allowed herself to rest, curling up on the sofa with a fresh cup of tea, Emma felt a strange mix of emotions. There was sadness, yes, for the life and love she had lost. But there was also a growing sense of excitement, of possibility. Daniel had meant to destroy her, to leave her with nothing. Instead, he had inadvertently set her free. Emma closed her eyes, allowing herself a small smile. She thought of Daniel, probably still blissfully unaware of what was coming. She thought of his young fiancée, who would soon discover that her wealthy older man was not what he seemed. And she thought of herself, of the strength she had discovered in the face of betrayal. The game had indeed begun. But it was a game Emma intended to win. The soft morning light was just beginning to filter through the curtains when Emma's phone erupted into a frenzy of vibrations. She had been dozing on the sofa, her mind still churning with plans and possibilities, when the insistent buzzing jolted her fully awake. Glancing at the screen, she saw Daniel's name flashing urgently. For a moment, Emma simply watched the phone dance across the coffee table, a small part of her savoring the panic she could almost feel radiating through the device. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Then, with a steady hand, she picked up the phone and answered, letting the line hang in silence for a few heartbeats before speaking. "What do you want, Daniel?" Her voice was eerily composed, betraying none of the tumultuous emotions that had kept her up all night. On the other end of the line, chaos reigned. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps, punctuated by what sounded like desperate sobs. "Emma, Jesus Christ, what did you do?" he managed to choke out between breaths. "The accounts, our money, it's gone, all of it." A slow smile curled on Emma's lips, a mixture of satisfaction and bitter amusement. Oh, he really thought he could outplay her. After 5 years together, had he learned nothing about her? "I'm sorry, Daniel," Emma replied, her voice dripping with mock concern. "I thought you said you'd taken all our savings with you. Isn't that what your message said?" There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a string of incoherent stammering. Emma could almost see Daniel's face, contorted with confusion and growing fear as he realized the gravity of his mistake. But I... Daniel stuttered, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Emma, what's going on? Where's our money?" Emma leaned back on the sofa, feeling a surge of power course through her. This was her moment, the culmination of a night spent reclaiming her life and her future. "Our money," she echoed, emphasizing the word. "I think you mean my money, Daniel. You see, when you decided to empty our joint account, which, by the way, you couldn't do without my signature, you inadvertently gave me all the reason I needed to protect our assets. Or should I say, my assets now." She heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like a muffled argument in the background. Emma's smile widened as she imagined the scene. Daniel, probably still in his hotel room, frantically trying to explain the situation to his young fiancée, who was undoubtedly wondering why her wealthy older man was suddenly in a panic about money. "Emma, please," Daniel's voice came back, a note of desperation creeping in. "This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't mean what I said in that message. I was drunk, I was being stupid. We can fix this, can't we? Just tell me where the money is." Emma almost laughed at the sheer audacity of his plea. Did he really think she would fall for such a transparent lie? That she would simply hand back the power he had so callously tried to take from her? "Oh, Daniel," she sighed, her voice a mixture of pity and disdain. "I'm afraid it's not that simple. You see, your little joke gave me a very real reason to fear for our financial security. As your wife and as the primary manager of our finances, I had a responsibility to protect our assets. So I did." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. In the background, she could hear the young fiancé's voice rising, demanding answers. Emma felt a twinge of sympathy for the girl. She was, after all, just another victim of Daniel's selfishness and deceit. "The money is safe," Emma continued, her voice hardening. "It's in accounts that you no longer have access to. I've spoken with our bank, our lawyer, and our financial advisor. They all agree that given the circumstances, your threat to leave me destitute, your admission of infidelity, and your attempt to steal our joint savings, my actions were not only justified but necessary." Daniel's response was a mixture of pleas and threats, vacillating between begging for forgiveness and warning of legal action. But Emma had anticipated this. She had spent the night not only securing their finances but also building a bulletproof case against any claims Daniel might try to make. "Legal action?" Emma echoed, unable to keep a note of amusement from her voice. "By all means, Daniel, go ahead. I'm sure the courts would be very interested in the text message you sent me. Not to mention the paper trail of your recent expenses. Those hotel rooms in Manchester weren't cheap, were they? Especially considering you weren't actually at a conference." She heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath, the realization dawning that she knew far more than he had anticipated. Emma had always been thorough, always paid attention to the details. It was a quality Daniel had once admired in her. Now, it was his undoing. "How did you?" Daniel began, but Emma cut him off. "It doesn't matter how I know, Daniel. What matters is that I do know. I know about the hotels, the restaurants, the jewelry you bought. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the charges on our credit cards? Did you think I wouldn't wonder why you needed to book a hotel in Manchester when you have a perfectly good apartment there for your business trips?" Emma's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of steel that made it clear she was done being the understanding, forgiving wife. She had played that role for too long, turning a blind eye to the signs she hadn't wanted to see. "But no more. Emma, please." Daniel's voice had lost all its earlier anger, replaced by a desperation that might have moved her once. "We can work this out. I made a mistake, I know that. But we've been together for 5 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" For a moment, Emma felt a flicker of the old pain, the hurt of betrayal threatening to overwhelm her carefully constructed composure. But she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the strength she had discovered in herself over the past few hours. "It meant everything to me, Daniel," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "That's why your betrayal hurts so much. That's why I can't simply forgive and forget. You didn't just cheat on me. You tried to destroy me. You were ready to leave me with nothing, laughing as you did it. Do you have any idea how that feels?" The line went quiet, save for Daniel's ragged breathing. In the background, Emma could hear drawers being opened and closed, the sound of frantic packing. It seemed the young fiancé had decided this vacation wasn't going as planned. "I'm sorry," Daniel finally said, his voice small and broken. "I don't know what I was thinking. Please, Emma, tell me how I can fix this. Tell me what I need to do." Emma closed her eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The adrenaline that had kept her going through the night was starting to wear off, leaving her feeling drained but oddly at peace. "There's nothing you can do, Daniel," she said quietly. "It's too late for that. I've already set things in motion that can't be undone. The best thing you can do now is accept that it's over. She heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. Over, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. You mean? Yes, Daniel, Emma confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotions roiling inside her. Our marriage is over. I've already contacted a divorce lawyer. You'll be receiving the papers soon. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma could almost see Daniel's world crumbling around him, much as hers had when she'd first read his cruel message. But unlike Daniel, she had found the strength to rebuild, to take control of her life and her future. I understand, Daniel finally said, his voice hollow with defeat. I'm sorry, Emma. For everything. Emma felt a lump form in her throat, the finality of the moment hitting her with unexpected force. Despite everything, a part of her mourned for the love they had once shared, for the future they had planned together. But that future was gone now, shattered by Daniel's betrayal and her own newfound strength. Goodbye, Daniel, she said softly, ending the call before he could respond. As she set the phone down, Emma felt a curious mixture of emotions wash over her. There was sadness, yes, for the end of a relationship that had once meant so much to her. But there was also a sense of relief, of freedom. For the first time in years, her future was entirely her own. She stood up, stretching muscles stiff from a night spent on the sofa. The morning sun was streaming through the windows now, bathing the apartment in a warm, golden light. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. Emma walked to the kitchen, her mind already turning to the tasks ahead. There was still much to do, lawyers to meet, accounts to sort out, a life to rebuild. But as she started to make a fresh pot of tea, she felt a sense of excitement building within her. The game Daniel had started with his cruel text message was indeed over. But for Emma, a new game was just beginning. And this time, she was determined to play by her own rules. As Emma sipped her freshly brewed tea, her mind wandered back over the past few months. The warning signs had been there, clear as day now that she looked back with open eyes. A new password on their shared accounts that Daniel had brushed off as a work security measure. Frantic phone calls he'd take out of earshot, always with a flimsy excuse about a demanding client. The unexpected late nights that had become more and more frequent. She shook her head, a rueful smile playing on her lips. How blind she had been, how willing to believe his lies. But that wasn't entirely true, was it? Deep down, she had known something was wrong. She just hadn't wanted to face it. Emma walked to the window, looking out over the bustling London street below. The city was coming to life, people rushing to work, shops opening their doors. Life went on, oblivious to the drama unfolding in her small corner of the world. As she watched a young couple walk hand in hand down the street, Emma's mind drifted to the day she had first suspected Daniel's infidelity. It had been a rainy Tuesday, much like any other in London. She had been working from home, buried in spreadsheets for a big project, when Daniel's phone had buzzed on the coffee table. Normally, Emma wouldn't have given it a second thought. But something about the rapid-fire series of notifications had caught her attention. Before she could stop herself, she had glanced at the screen. The messages were from someone named Lily, and even from the brief preview, it was clear they were far from professional. Emma had felt her world tilt on its axis in that moment. But instead of confronting Daniel, instead of allowing her hurt and anger to take over, she had made a decision. She would prepare. She would protect herself. And when the time came, she would be ready. From that day forward, Emma had begun to quietly, methodically, prepare for the worst. She had started by opening a separate bank account, one that Daniel knew nothing about. Each week, she would transfer a small amount from their joint savings, never enough to raise suspicion, but over time, it had grown into a sizable nest egg. She had also begun to keep meticulous records of their finances. Every transaction, every unusual expense, all carefully documented. At the time, she had told herself it was just good financial management. But deep down, she knew she was building a case, gathering evidence for a day she hoped would never come. Emma moved away from the window, her tea forgotten on the sill. She walked to the small home office she and Daniel had shared, her eyes falling on the filing cabinet in the corner. With a determined set to her jaw, she pulled open the drawer and began rifling through the folders. There it was, the folder labeled Joint Accounts. Emma pulled it out, spreading the contents across the desk. Bank statements, investment reports, credit card bills, all carefully annotated in her neat handwriting. She had spent months poring over these documents, tracking every pound, following the money trail that Daniel had so carelessly left behind. As she looked at the paper trail before her, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had been thorough, meticulous, always thinking 3 steps ahead. It was a skill she had honed in her professional life, one that had served her well in her career as a financial analyst. Now, it had become her saving grace in her personal life as well. Emma's eyes fell on a particular bank statement from 3 months ago. There it was, the first significant withdrawal that had set off alarm bells in her mind. £5,000, transferred to an account she didn't recognize. When she had casually mentioned it to Daniel, he had brushed it off as a mistake by the bank, promising to look into it. But Emma hadn't let it go. She had dug deeper, following the money trail with the tenacity of a bloodhound. That single transaction had led her to discover a web of deceit, hotel bookings, expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases. All hidden under the guise of work expenses, all paid for with their joint funds. With each discovery, Emma had felt a piece of her heart break. But she had channeled that pain into action, using it to fuel her determination. She had begun to move their savings, bit by bit, into accounts under her name only. It was a risky move, she knew, but she had been careful. She had used her power of attorney, granted by Daniel for ease of managing their finances, to make the transfers seem like routine financial management. Emma sat down at the desk, her fingers tracing over the numbers that told the story of her marriage's demise. She remembered the day she had made the final transfer, moving the last of their joint savings into her private account. It had been just a week ago, and she had felt a mix of fear and exhilaration as she had confirmed the transaction. Little did she know that just days later, Daniel would make his move, thinking he had cleaned out their accounts. The irony of it all almost made her laugh. He must have seen the near-zero balance and assumed he had one, never realizing that the money had been gone long before he tried to take it. Emma leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips as she remembered Daniel's panicked phone call. "You thought I wouldn't notice," she had whispered into the phone. "You played your hand too soon." Every sob that had come from the other end of the line had been as satisfying as she had imagined. It wasn't just about the money, although that was certainly important. It was about taking back control, about refusing to be the victim in Daniel's selfish game. As she sat there, surrounded by the evidence of Daniel's betrayal and her own clever maneuvering, Emma felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had done it. She had outsmarted the man who thought he could leave her with nothing. She had turned his trap into her triumph. But even as she savored her victory, Emma knew this was just the beginning. Daniel wouldn't give up easily. He would fight, he would threaten, he would try to charm his way back into her good graces. But Emma was ready for him. She stood up, gathering the documents and returning them to their folder. Then, with deliberate steps, she walked to the living room and picked up her phone. It was time to make some calls. First on her list was her friend Sarah, a fierce divorce lawyer known for her no-nonsense approach. Emma had been hesitant to contact her before, clinging to the hope that her suspicions about Daniel were wrong. But now, there was no more room for doubt. As the phone rang, Emma felt a surge of determination. She was done being reactive, done waiting for Daniel's next move. From now on, she would be the one setting the pace, calling the shots. "Sarah. It's Emma," she said when her friend picked up. "I need your help. I'm leaving Daniel, and I want to make sure I do it right." The conversation that followed was long and detailed. Emma laid out everything, the infidelity, the financial deception, her own countermeasures. Sarah listened intently, asking pointed questions and offering sharp insights. By the time the call ended, Emma had a clear plan of action. She knew the legal steps she needed to take, the documents she needed to gather, the protections she needed to put in place. It wouldn't be easy, Sarah had warned her. Daniel would likely fight dirty. But with the evidence Emma had collected and the preemptive measures she had taken, they were starting from a position of strength. As Emma ended the call, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For months, She had been carrying the burden of her suspicions alone, always second-guessing herself, always wondering if she was overreacting. Now, finally, she had someone in her corner, someone who understood the gravity of the situation and was ready to fight alongside her. She walked back to the window, looking out at the city once more. The morning rush had subsided, replaced by the steady rhythm of a London afternoon. Life went on, and so would she. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the last vestiges of doubt and fear leave her body. She had walked into Daniel's trap with her eyes wide open, and she had emerged not as a victim, but as a victor. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. The game Daniel thought he was playing had backfired spectacularly. He had underestimated her, had taken for granted the intelligence and resilience that had first attracted him to her. Now, he would learn just how formidable an opponent she could be. As the afternoon sun warmed her face, Emma allowed herself a moment of quiet celebration. The road ahead would be difficult, she knew. But for the first time in months, she felt truly alive, truly herself. Daniel had tried to trap her, but in doing so, he had only succeeded in setting her free. The sun had begun its descent over London's skyline, casting long shadows across Emma's living room. She sat on the sofa, her laptop open before her, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The email she was about to send would set in motion a series of events that would change her life forever. With a deep breath, she clicked send and leaned back, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension wash over her. The email was to her boss, explaining that she needed to take some personal time off. She had been vague about the details, but hinted at a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie, her family was falling apart, after all. As she closed her laptop, her phone buzzed again. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, Emma considered ignoring it. She had said all she needed to say earlier. But curiosity got the better of her, and she answered, her voice cool and composed. Yes, Daniel. Emma, baby, please. Daniel's voice came through, a mixture of desperation and charm that she had once found irresistible. Now, it just made her skin crawl. We can fix this, just tell me where the money is. She almost laughed at the sheer audacity. But instead, she leaned back, savoring the power shift. Oh, you mean my money, she corrected. Because legally, you have nothing, Daniel. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Emma could almost see Daniel's face, the realization dawning that she wasn't going to be manipulated this time. In the background, she could hear another voice, young, female, increasingly agitated. His new fiancée must have been there, watching him break down, realizing with dawning horror that Daniel wasn't the wealthy man she thought. What do you mean, legally? Daniel's voice had lost its charm now, replaced by a growing panic. That's our money, Emma. We earned it together. Emma felt a surge of anger at his words. Together, she repeated, her voice sharp. Was it together when you were spending our savings on hotel rooms and jewelry for your little girlfriend? Was it together when you were planning to leave me destitute? There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, Daniel's voice came back, smaller now, desperate. How did you know about that? Emma allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Oh, Daniel, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? I'm a financial analyst, remember? Tracking money is what I do for a living. She could hear muffled voices in the background, the young fiancé demanding answers. Emma almost felt sorry for the girl. Almost. But then she remembered the cruel laughter in Daniel's text, the callous way he had planned to destroy her life, and her resolve hardened. Let me spell it out for you, Daniel, Emma continued, her voice steady and clear. Every penny you spent on your affair is documented. Every hotel room, every expensive dinner, every piece of jewelry. I have records of it all. And do you know what that means? She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. When Daniel didn't respond, she pressed on. It means that not only did you commit adultery, but you also misused our joint funds. In the eyes of the law, that's financial misconduct. And it gives me every right to protect what's left of our assets. Daniel's breathing had become ragged, panic evident in every exhale. But the accounts, he stammered. I checked this morning. They're empty. Where's the money, Emma? Emma leaned back on the sofa, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the culmination of months of careful planning and sleepless nights. The money is safe, she said simply. In accounts that you no longer have access to. She heard a crash in the background, followed by a string of muffled curses. It seemed Daniel's temper was getting the better of him. Good, Emma thought. Let him lose control. It would only strengthen her position. You can't do this. Daniel's voice came back, anger now mixed with his panic. I'll fight you, Emma. I'll take you to court. Emma couldn't help but chuckle at his threat. By all means, Daniel, she said, her voice calm. Take me to court. I'm sure the judge would be very interested in seeing the evidence I've gathered. The bank statements, the credit card bills, the hotel receipts. Oh, and let's not forget that charming text message you sent me. The one where you bragged about leaving me penniless. I'm sure that will go over really well in court. The line went quiet for a long moment. Emma could almost hear the gears turning in Daniel's head as he realized the full extent of the trap he had walked into. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. What do you want, Emma? She closed her eyes, feeling a wave of emotions wash over her. Anger, hurt, betrayal, but also a sense of triumph. She had won, and they both knew it. What do I want? She repeated softly. I want a divorce, Daniel. A clean break. You sign the papers, you walk away, and we never have to see each other again. And the money? Daniel asked, a note of defeat creeping into his voice. Emma's eyes snapped open, hardening with resolve. The money stays with me, she said firmly. Consider it compensation for the years I wasted with you, for the future you tried to steal from me. You're young, Daniel. You can start over. Find a job, build a new life. Isn't that what you wanted? She heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like a muffled sob. For a moment, Emma felt a twinge of sympathy. Despite everything, a part of her still cared for the man she had loved for so long. But then she remembered his cruelty, his selfishness, and her resolve strengthened. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers, Emma said, her voice softening slightly. If you sign them without contest, you can walk away from this with your dignity intact. Fight me, and I'll make sure every sordid detail of your affair becomes public record. The choice is yours. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Emma could hear muffled voices, Daniel and his fiancée arguing in hushed, urgent tones. Finally, Daniel's voice came back, defeated and small. Okay, Emma. You win. I'll sign the papers. Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders at his words. It was over. She had won. But even as relief flooded through her, she felt a deep sadness for what might have been. Goodbye, Daniel, she said softly, ending the call before he could respond. As she set her phone down, Emma felt a curious mix of emotions wash over her. There was relief, yes, and a sense of triumph. But there was also a deep, aching sadness for the love she had lost, for the future she had once dreamed of. She stood up, walking to the window and looking out over the London skyline. The city was bathed in the golden light of sunset, beautiful and indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded in her small apartment. Life would go on, she realized. The world would keep turning. As she stood there, watching the sun sink below the horizon, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. The truth had finally come out, painful as it was. Daniel's lies and betrayal had been exposed, and she had emerged stronger for it. She turned away from the window, her eyes falling on the framed photos that still adorned the walls. Memories of happier times, holidays, anniversaries, quiet moments at home. With steady hands, she began to take them down, one by one. It was time to pack away the past and look to the future. As she worked, Emma's mind wandered to the days ahead. There would be challenges, she knew. Legal battles to fight, a life to rebuild. But for the first time in months, she felt a sense of hope. She had survived Daniel's betrayal, had outmaneuvered his attempts to leave her with nothing. Whatever the future held, she would face it on her own terms. The last rays of sunlight faded from the room as Emma finished packing away the photos. She stood in the center of the living room, looking around at the space that suddenly felt both familiar and strange. This had been their home, hers and Daniel's. Now, it would be just hers. With a deep breath, Emma squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. The truth had unfolded, painful and liberating in equal measure. But with that truth came freedom, and the chance to write a new chapter in her life. As night fell over London, Emma allowed herself a small, determined smile. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready for whatever it might bring. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil of the previous day. Emma woke early, her mind already racing with the tasks ahead. As she made her way to the kitchen to brew her morning tea, her phone buzzed with a message from her lawyer, Sarah. "Documents are ready. Meeting at 10 a.m. to go over everything. You ready for this?" Emma took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the phone screen. Was she ready? The events of the past 48 hours had been a whirlwind, but she knew this was just the beginning. With steady hands, she typed her reply, "Ready as I'll ever be. See you at 10. As she waited for her tea to steep, Emma's gaze wandered around the apartment. It felt different now, as if the space itself had changed along with her circumstances. The absence of Daniel's things, which she had packed away the night before, left visible gaps on shelves and in closets. But rather than feeling empty, the apartment felt lighter, freer. Emma sipped her tea, mentally preparing herself for the day ahead. She had a meeting with Sarah, then an appointment with her bank to finalize the transfer of funds. And then she would deliver the final blow to Daniel's illusions of control. At precisely 10 a.m., Emma walked into Sarah's office, her head held high. The lawyer greeted her with a warm smile and a firm handshake, gesturing for her to take a seat. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked, genuine concern in her voice. Emma managed a small smile. "I'm okay. It's been intense. But I'm ready to move forward." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. Now, let's go over these documents." For the next hour, they pored over legal papers, discussing terms and conditions, asset divisions, and potential scenarios. Emma was grateful for Sarah's clear explanations and patient guidance through the complex legal jargon. As they neared the end of their meeting, Sarah leaned back in her chair, a satisfied look on her face. "Emma, I have to say, you've put yourself in an incredibly strong position. The evidence you've gathered, the steps you've taken to protect your assets, it's impressive. Daniel doesn't stand a chance if he tries to fight this." Emma felt a surge of pride at Sarah's words. All those months of quiet preparation, of doubting herself and second-guessing her instincts, had paid off. She was no longer the victim in this story. She was taking control. "There's just one more thing," Sarah said, pulling out a final document. "It's about the apartment." Emma's brow furrowed in confusion. "The apartment? But that's in both our names. I assumed we'd have to sell it and split the proceeds." A sly smile spread across Sarah's face. "Actually, that's not the case. Do you remember signing some renewal paperwork last year?" Emma nodded slowly, trying to recall the details. "Yes, Daniel asked me to handle it. He was busy with work, so I took care of everything." "Why?" Sarah's smile widened. "Well, it seems that in handling that paperwork, you also signed a document transferring full ownership of the apartment to yourself. Legally, the apartment is entirely yours." Emma's jaw dropped. She remembered the stack of papers Daniel had shoved at her, asking her to take care of it because he was too busy. She had assumed it was just standard renewal forms. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined. "But, how is that possible?" Emma asked, her mind reeling. "Surely Daniel would have had to sign something too." Sarah shook her head. "Not necessarily. If the original lease agreement gave either party the right to make changes, and if Daniel gave you power of attorney, which, by the way, he did when he authorized you to manage your joint finances, then your signature alone was enough." Emma sat back in her chair, stunned. The apartment was hers. The home she had poured her heart into, the space she had lovingly decorated and made their own, was now solely in her name. It was a gift she had unknowingly given herself, a safety net she hadn't realized she was weaving. "Does Daniel know?" she asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. "Not unless you've told him." This information isn't readily available unless someone goes looking for it. Which, I'm guessing, Daniel hasn't done yet. Emma's mind raced with the implications. This was it, the final blow, the last card she held in her hand. With this, she could cut the last ties binding her to Daniel, could truly start fresh on her own terms. What do you want to do? Sarah asked gently. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew she had to do. I want to tell him, she said firmly. He needs to know that he has nothing left to fight for. Sarah nodded approvingly. I think that's wise. Do you want me to be there when you make the call? Emma considered for a moment, then shook her head. No, thank you. This is something I need to do myself. After leaving Sarah's office, Emma made her way to a small park near her apartment. She needed neutral ground for this, a place where she could feel the sun on her face and the breeze in her hair as she closed this chapter of her life. Finding a quiet bench, Emma pulled out her phone and dialed Daniel's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before he picked up. Emma. His voice was wary, uncertain. Hello, Daniel, she said, her voice steady. There's something you need to know. She heard him take a sharp breath, preparing himself for whatever blow he thought was coming. If only he knew. I've met with my lawyer, Emma continued, her voice calm and controlled. The divorce papers are ready. But before you sign them, there's one more thing we need to discuss. What is it? Daniel asked, a note of resignation in his voice. Emma paused, gathering her thoughts. This was it, the moment she severed the last tie binding her to her old life. It's about the apartment, she said finally. I thought you should know, it's not in both our names anymore. It's just in mine. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Emma could almost hear the gears turning in Daniel's head, could imagine the look of confusion and dawning horror on his face. What do you mean? He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I mean, Emma said, her voice gaining strength with each word, that when you asked me to handle the lease renewal last year, you also signed over full ownership of the apartment to me. Legally, Daniel, the apartment is mine. You don't even have a place to come back to. Daniel's breathing turned ragged, panic evident in every exhale. In the background, Emma could hear raised voices, his young fiancé, no doubt, demanding answers. This can't be legal, Daniel stammered. You must have tricked me somehow. Emma felt a flash of anger at his accusation. I didn't trick you, Daniel, she said, her voice hard. I simply signed the papers you told me to sign. Papers you couldn't be bothered to look at yourself because you were too busy with your affair. The line went quiet again, save for the sound of Daniel's panicked breathing and the increasingly agitated voice of his fiancée in the background. So what now? Daniel finally asked, defeat evident in his voice. Emma took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders as she prepared to deliver her final words to the man she had once loved. Now, you sign the divorce papers, she said firmly. You walk away, and you start over. You left everything behind to chase a fantasy, Daniel, and now you have nothing. No money, no home, no me. She paused, listening to the chaos unfolding on the other end of the line. It sounded like Daniel's 21-year-old fiancé wasn't staying either. Good, Emma thought. Let her see him for who he really is. Goodbye, Daniel, she said sweetly, her voice laced with a finality that left no room for argument. Before he could respond, Emma ended the call. She sat there on the park bench for a long moment, letting the reality of what had just happened wash over her. It was done. The final blow had been delivered. She was free. As she stood up, Emma felt lighter than she had in months. The sun seemed brighter, the air fresher. She had faced her fears, had stood up to the man who had tried to destroy her, and she had emerged victorious. With a spring in her step, Emma began to walk home, to her home, hers alone now. As she walked, she pulled out her phone once more, this time to make a very different kind of call. Hi, this is Emma Thompson, she said when the call connected. I'd like to book a first-class ticket to Paris, please. For tomorrow. As she finalized the details of her impromptu trip, Emma couldn't help but smile. She was using what was rightfully hers to start her new life, on her terms. And Daniel. He would have to live every day knowing that he had lost the best thing he ever had. That, Emma realized as she ended the call, was the sweetest revenge of all. The Parisian morning air was crisp and invigorating as Emma stepped out of her hotel. The city was just waking up, the streets still quiet save for the occasional rumble of delivery trucks and the enticing aroma of fresh bread wafting from nearby bakeries. She took a deep breath, savoring the moment. This was freedom. This was her new beginning. It had been a week since she'd left London, a week since she'd delivered that final blow to Daniel. The memory of that conversation in the park still brought a small smile to her face. Not out of cruelty or vindictiveness, but out of pride. Pride in her strength, in her ability to stand up for herself and take control of her life. As she began to walk down the Champs-Élysées, Emma's mind wandered back to the whirlwind of events that had led her here. The frantic packing, the tearful goodbyes to friends, the moment of panic as she boarded the plane, wondering if she was making the right decision. But as the lights of London had faded beneath her, so too had her doubts. Now, as she strolled along one of the most famous avenues in the world, Emma felt a sense of possibility that she hadn't experienced in years. The weight of her failed marriage, of Daniel's betrayal, seemed to lift with each step she took on the Parisian cobblestones. She found a quaint cafe and settled in at an outdoor table, ordering a café au lait and a croissant in her rusty French. As she waited for her breakfast, Emma pulled out her notebook, a beautiful leather-bound journal she'd bought on her first day in Paris. It had become her constant companion, a place to pour out her thoughts and dreams as she navigated this new chapter of her life. Opening to a fresh page, Emma began to write, Day 7 in Paris. It's strange how quickly a place can start to feel like home. I've barely scratched the surface of this beautiful city, and yet I already feel more at peace here than I have in years. Is this what freedom feels like? The ability to wake up each morning and decide exactly how I want to spend my day, without having to consider anyone else's needs or wants. I thought I'd feel lonely, being in a strange city all by myself. But the truth is, I've never felt more connected to myself, to the world around me. Every interaction, every new experience, feels like a gift. I'm rediscovering parts of myself that I'd forgotten existed. Yesterday, I visited the Louvre. I spent hours wandering through the galleries, losing myself in the beauty and history surrounding me. I found myself standing in front of the Mona Lisa, trying to unlock the secrets behind her enigmatic smile. And then it hit me, I was smiling too. Not for anyone else's benefit, not because I felt I should, but simply because I was happy. Truly, genuinely happy. Emma paused in her writing as the waiter brought her breakfast. She thanked him with a smile and took a sip of her coffee, savoring the rich flavor. As she bit into her croissant, flaky and buttery and perfect, she couldn't help but let out a small laugh. Who would have thought that a week ago, she was sitting in her London apartment, her world crumbling around her? Turning back to her journal, she continued to write, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the reality of my situation to come crashing down on me. The divorce isn't finalized yet. There will be paperwork to deal with, loose ends to tie up. But even when I think about all of that, I don't feel dread or anxiety. I feel ready. Ready to face whatever comes next. I spoke to Sarah yesterday. She says everything is proceeding smoothly with the divorce. Daniel hasn't contested anything, I suppose he knows he doesn't have a leg to stand on. She asked me when I was planning to come back to London. The truth is, I don't know. I'm not sure I want to go back, at least not permanently. For the first time in my life, I feel like I can do anything, be anyone. The world is wide open, full of possibilities. Do I want to stay in Paris? Move to another country entirely? Go back to school? Start a new career? The options are endless, and for once, that doesn't terrify me. It excites me. Emma paused again, watching the street come to life around her. Parisians hurried to work, tourists began to emerge from their hotels, street vendors set up their stalls. The energy of the city was infectious, and Emma felt a surge of inspiration. I think I'll take a painting class, she wrote, the idea forming even as she put pen to paper. There's an art studio I passed the other day that offers lessons for beginners. Why not? I've always wanted to learn, but Daniel always said it was a waste of time and money. That's another thing I'm learning to do, make decisions without hearing Daniel's voice in my head, criticizing or dismissing my choices. It's liberating, but also a little scary. I'm realizing how much I let his opinions shape my life, even before the affair. Never again. From now on, I live for me. Emma finished her breakfast and signaled for the check. As she waited, she made a mental list of the things she wanted to do today. Visit the art studio and sign up for classes. Explore the Marais district, which her guidebook said was full of trendy boutiques and galleries. Maybe treat herself to a nice dinner at that little bistro she'd spotted yesterday. After paying for her meal, Emma stood up, stretching in the warm morning sun. She had just shouldered her bag and was about to set off when her phone buzzed. For a moment, her heart rate spiked. Was it Daniel? But when she looked at the screen, she saw it was a message from her sister, Kate. How's Paris treating you? Send pics. Miss you loads but so proud of you. XX. Emma smiled, quickly snapping a selfie with the bustling Champs-Élysées in the background. She sent it to Kate with the caption, "Living my best life. Miss you too, but I think I've found where I belong. Want to come visit?" As she slipped her phone back into her bag, Emma felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. For her sister's unwavering support. For Sarah's legal expertise. For the strength she'd found within herself. And yes, even for Daniel, because without his betrayal, she might never have found the courage to create this new life for herself. With a spring in her step, Emma set off down the avenue. She had a full day ahead of her, a future brimming with potential, and a heart finally open to all the possibilities life had to offer. As she walked, weaving between tourists and locals alike, Emma's mind drifted back to that fateful night when she'd received Daniel's cruel text message. "Good luck surviving on the street," he'd said. If only he could see her now, striding confidently through one of the most beautiful cities in the world, not just surviving, but thriving. Emma hadn't just survived. She had won. She had taken control of her narrative, turned betrayal into opportunity, and emerged stronger than ever. And as she rounded a corner, the Eiffel Tower coming into view in the distance, Emma knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. She pulled out her journal one last time, scribbling a final thought before embarking on her day of Parisian adventures. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. My beginning. And I can't wait to see where this journey takes me next. With that, Emma closed her journal, tucked it safely in her bag, and stepped forward into her new life. The streets of Paris stretched out before her, a world of opportunities waiting to be explored. And Emma was ready to embrace every moment, every challenge, every joy that lay ahead. She had booked her first-class flight to Paris using what was rightfully hers, but the real luxury wasn't in the champagne served on the plane or the plush hotel suite she now called home. The true luxury was in the freedom she now possessed, the freedom to shape her own destiny, to write her own story. And Emma, she would live every day knowing that she had not only survived but had blossomed in the face of adversity. She had lost a husband, but gained a world of possibilities. And that, she realized as she disappeared into the vibrant streets of Paris, was the sweetest victory of all.